Welcome to Charts Today, and today's edition for Friday the 16th of December comes to you from London. And we start as always by looking at currencies first, then we'll look at global stock markets, some commodities, and last of all some stocks. And remembering this is my weekly chart, my 1% log scale point and figure. These are my long-term charts, my medium-term daily and 0.5% point and figure log scale, and then my short-term 60-minute chart and the 60-minute log scale, 0.1% of a log scale. So this is just a long-term, medium-term, short-term view. Just in those 6 charts, we get an overview very, very quickly. So we see the dollar break out on the weekly really, really clearly. Dollar strength continues. We saw the jump on the Fed rate decision this week, but that's very much in line with the breakout, so we shouldn't be too surprised. We are seeing upside potential here of around 2%, 1.8, 2.1%. So we do have upside targets to play for. And the very long term 1% chart, we have a massive upside target right back to the sort of highs we saw in the late 80s. But of course, that will take a long time to play out. But for the moment, it looks like we're going to have another run like we saw in 2014 all over again. So next year should be a big year for the dollar. And conversely, on that Fed announcement, the euro yesterday making fresh lows, and that is really, really significant. This is probably the biggest story at the moment, is that the euro has gone lower than this 2015 year low. That's multi-year lows. And more importantly, on this 1% chart, that has activated this target here. So we are through activating the 89 target, so that's to 15% downside. There is another potential big target, which is all the way to 0.6. Yes, that's a euro will only cost you 60 cents US, but we've got to move below that another 1%. And to do that, we'd need to really break below the 103 level. But interestingly, we've activated this first downside target. This looks like the beginning of some very big moves in the euro. And if we look here, we see on this chart as well, we are moving to new lows. All of these downside targets, 103, 103, 102, and on this short-term chart, this 101 target's really hanging over us. So it does, and this is a new downside target as well. Once that column's locked in, we will have another downside target there as well. In fact, we can put a quick look on that, and it's saying 98.50. So it does suggest that we're going to see headlines very, very soon. The euro falls below $1 in value. And there's all sorts of bad news flow that will happen, but that is now really the story. And in fact, if we want to get a hands up on the short term, we can go right to the 1-minute chart on the euro, press the T key on your system, and here we see the targets 1017, 1018. That's a cluster. 2 targets from 8th and 14th of December, last week and this week, giving us that downside of about 2.5%. So it looks like it's going to happen pretty soon. There will be small upside targets, and this is the place to just watch for any counter trend moves. And no, on the really, really short-term charts, we need to wait for the next price action. But at the moment, the euro is looking pretty dire. Looking at the dollar against the yen, dollar looking incredibly strong against the Japanese yen. Taking a breath the last several hours, but really coming through on this weekly cloud. This is really key. The Japanese will be watching this very closely. We might hit some resistance around the 121 level. We've got a target to 121 on the short-term chart. We are breaking to positive on this point and figure chart. The yen is starting to break that downtrend, which is the same downtrend that we're seeing here, just breaking on the price as well. So that yen weakness, dollar strength. If we look at sterling had a sell-off off the back of the Fed announcement as well, coming back testing this 124 level. That's turned the short-term chart bearish. 122.74 is the short-term downside target. We do have other downside targets here and lots of long-term downside targets. Despite the sort of recovery that we've seen in sterling over the last several weeks, we are still bearish. So it's hard to be a sterling bull still. And the same here with sterling euro. We have actually just improved on the sterling euro chart. We've come through on the cloud where we see this this sideways range at the moment. Euro weakness is really playing its hand here, so we expect sterling to probably just outperform the euro a little bit. If you look at sterling Swiss, that recovery has also happened, but again is a bit short-lived. We are a bit range bound, and just as a proxy, I like to look at the sterling Aussie dollar. That's also a bit flat, but with mixed targets as well. If we go to markets, the S&P 500. This was really key. Yesterday it just pulled back a little bit, but really nothing much to worry about. Bullish, bullish, bullish. This market is just looking amazing now. We do have this new upside target of 8.8% to 2461, and that might sound hard to believe, but then 2263 did look improbable as well. Interestingly, we have to break above this 2279 level to activate that target, and we do have a downside one here as well. We can just take a look at that chart. We also have this 2341 that was given back in June. And that was a big move in the market way back then that's caused that target. So these targets can be in place for quite a long time. That's on the 60-minute chart. So that's quite key. If you want to know what's going on in the very, very short term, go back to the 1-minute chart, press the T key on your system, and we see here, this is the 3x3. It's actually probably best to look at the 5x3. That's a better box size. 2320, 2255, and if we just alter the box size right down to a granular 1-minute, one point chart, we see here that we haven't quite made it to the downside targets. That's bullish confirmation that we haven't made it to the downside targets, and then we've got a new upside target, 2291. Looks like this 2300 level is where the S&P 500 is going to start gunning for. If we look at the Nasdaq 100, we talked about the break last week. That break is really key through that the 4900 level on the Nasdaq 100. We're through that. We're holding it. That's good news. And we see on the long-term chart, this chart just does look really quite bullish. Lots of upside targets here as well for the Nasdaq. We've got targets of 20-30% upside. In the short term, we've got targets of 3 and 4% upside, 5,100. So it looks pretty convincingly like Nasdaq is going to get back above this 5,100 level. If we take a look at the Dow, the Dow is actually also holding on to these highs. It really has had a stellar performance. We've got 20,857. That's 5% upside. So 20,000. The debate as to whether the Dow will get above 20,000 is not even a debate. It's definitely going to happen. And if we look at the 1-minute chart, we again just press. We go to the 1-minute chart and we press the T key. There's a lot of data that's got to load for that 1-minute chart, and we see here that if we go down to the smaller box sizes, we're getting this 20,115. We go to 10x3, 20,090. Not a lot of downside targets. This is the 5x3. This is very granular. 20,111. All this sort of upside just does suggest that the Dow is quite quickly going to go through that 20,000 level. We look at the Russell 2000. Really has jumped since the election. Just a massive move in the broader US stocks, and it's really quite impressive that it's just holding on to those gains. We don't have any really clear short-term targets at the moment, but lots of targets to 20% upside. Next year is going to be the American stock market's year by the looks of things. Looking at the futures before we open in the US, we see not much movement in the future, so we're going to wait for the price action through the day to give us new targets there. But again, the medium-term charts look great. Footsie just can't get through this 7,000 level. Really struggling at the moment, but it will do. We don't have any clear short-term upside targets here, but if we go again to the 1-minute chart, I like going to the 1-minute chart for a little sort of clue as to what's going to happen for the day. And if we go right down to the smaller box sizes, the 1 point box size, 70.38. We do have a couple of downside targets, but this looks like 7,000 will be broken. Taking a look at some other markets, the Footsie 250 holding its own just as well. Again, a shortage of clear upside targets on the short-term chart, but still ending above the cloud for the week, so that looks pretty good. The S&P 500, the DAX also looking good, breaking out. Remember, we talked we talked about this breakout this on the DAX 10,700, 10,800. That's what it's done. So that's looking really powerful too. And on the short-term charts, we see here we have got this 2.5% upside target as well. So the German market really running that cross into bullish long-term territory. Good. So Nikkei looking very bullish as well. Going through on the cloud here, the Japanese will be watching that, and that's, we want to see a few weeks of that holding, but the fact the cloud's falling away suggests that we will hold above the cloud. So that's a bullish long-term transition for Japan, looking really good, and 6% upside there. A weaker yen really helping out. Shanghai, the Chinese market hasn't looked at all good. Still short-term downside, 2.5% downside. Looks like we might find some support here. But we do have still this long-term bearish picture, and the Hang Seng looks worse still. Really, downside targets 4 and 5% downside, and we're just breaking down there. So making new lows, not good. So China is the weak spot in global markets at the moment. Asia, India is looking a little bit better. Has had a torrid time in the last few months, but it is actually starting to look a bit better again. And the Australian market holding its bullish position on all three fronts, with upside in the short term 5 to 7%, so that's looking good as well. We go to commodities. Brent crude is crossing the cloud on the bullish on the 60-minute, sorry, in the weekly chart. That's looking really good as well. We see here that we have got the first 6 months of the year is when we get the strong point in the dollar, the driving season. Sorry, and we see here that we're through on the weekly. That's bullish. The short-term chart is a little bit bearish at the moment below the cloud. So we do have downside potential of 6%, upside potential of 4%, waiting for a move out of this sort of little flag here to define that. We would expect that to be an up move based on the seasonality and the fact that we're above the trend on the longer-term charts. WTI, much the same picture as well. We don't have the downside target here, we just have the upside targets, and so oil is looking pretty bullish. Nat gas is actually looking a bit weaker, below on the 60-minute chart, so that's quite key. And a lot of the softs are looking pretty weak as well. Wheat has come back above, but we do still have this longer-term bearish picture. Going straight to gold, gold has really had a rout recently, trying to put in a base at the moment. We've got an upside target to 1142, but a downside target to 1092, and you'd have to favour on the short-term chart that downside target. This really is showing you've got 1069 as a downside target on the long-term chart. These charts turning bearish, but the really big thing to wait for is the weekly Ichimoku chart, and that has actually been pretty good over the years with gold. And we see here we did find support on that cloud. Will we find it here at about 1100? That's the big question. Also, gold does tend to have a strong start to the year, so we wouldn't be surprised to see it finding support here and bouncing on the cloud. It had a strong start last year and the year before, but it is still a bearish chart at the moment. If we look at silver, we see much the same picture here. Again, just testing support in the long term. Will that hold, and will we get a bounce in the new year? Again, that precious metals had a good move at the start of last year. This year, not so much on silver the year before, so you can't rely on the seasonality, but let's just see whether it holds that weekly support level. Copper is bearish on the short-term chart with downside potential of about anywhere between 2 and 3.5%, but this chart does look stellar in the long and medium-term charts. Really big upside targets here. Taking a look at US government bonds, bond yields obviously jumped on the Fed announcement. We do have a new downside target to 245 if we break below the 257 level, but this is a really big long-term transition in US interest rates. They almost certainly now we're into a raising rate environment based on this chart, and of course that's what the market's pricing in. Apple making a long-term recovery through the cloud, that's good news. Got an upside target of 3% in the short term. Google, bullish on all three. No clear short-term upside targets, but lots of medium-term targets, as much as 40% upside. Looking at Amazon, again, upside targets, a bit more of a mixed picture. Amazon, not quite as clear. Facebook, again, lots of long-term upside targets, again, a bit of a mixed picture here, but bullish above the cloud again. Getting back into those 120s is quite key. Looking a little bit like a double bottom here, but we've got to get back above the cloud. And Microsoft also just looking bullish above all three clouds. That's it for today. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.